Hi, my name's Simon Bennett. I'm the ZAP project lead and founder, and this is a series of training sessions I'm giving for the folks here at Stack.org. There are people watching live, so some of them may ask questions as we go along, but if you're watching this afterwards on YouTube, then please, if you've got any questions, ask them in the comments section below. So in the previous sections, I covered the sites tree and the ZAP 2.10 release. And today I'm going to get on to passive scanning. So passive scanning is, I thought it was going to be quite a quick session, and I started looking through and I realized I've got a lot to talk about. And one of the first things I'll mention is that, so passive scanning is where where ZAP looks at the requests and responses and just by looking at them raises potential issues if it thinks there are problems. So it's not aggressive, it just looks, it doesn't touch. And some people have asked us, how do you turn on the ZAP passive scanner? And the answer is you don't. It's always on. So you have to go through a series of hoops to actually turn it off if you want to. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive straight into a demo. So I will start with sharing my screen. And I will now switch to ZAP. Hopefully you can see that. And I am now using ZAP 2.10. And I will quickly point out that we've got this new thing. If you are using ZAP 2.10, we do want to hear from you. So there's a questionnaire. So click that Learn More button and fill in that questionnaire if you haven't already. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the ZAP Spider. And I'm going to run it against budget. So I want you to look down here. We have these counters at the bottom, which kind of give you an idea of what's going on in the background. And you can see that if you hover over these, they'll actually tell you things. So we've got there's a spider one there. You may see that go to 1 fairly briefly, but I want to keep an eye on this passive scan queue because I will kick that off. And the spider finished very quickly, but there you'll see this passive scan queue got quite large and is now going down. So what happens is whenever we proxy any requests through ZAP or when we run certain tools, including both the spiders, then these all of the requests are added to the passive scan queue. And this runs in the background. And we do that so that when you're browsing or when you're proxying your browser through ZAP, it doesn't slow things down at all. Or not very much at all, because some of the passive scan rules can take a bit longer than others. And you would really notice that if you were waiting for those rules to run while proxying through ZAP. So that's really the only indication, the most obvious indication that ZAP is doing passive scanning. But the other thing is, if you look down here now, we have a set of alerts, and we have 1 medium priority, 7 low, and 4 informational. And they are all shown in the alerts tab. And you can see we give a total number of the alerts. And if you select any of these, you will see the details, and you can also double click on them as well. So these particular alerts have been raised by the passive scanner because that's the only things that's running at the moment. And you will find that if you run the active scanner, the alerts appear down here as well. But we haven't done that, so these are all results that have come from passive scanning. And you'll see the kind of things that we're seeing that can be found. So X-frame option header not set, absence of anti-CSF token. And if you actually have a look at the request and response, one of the things you'll find, if we have any evidence in the alert, then this is highlighted. So here we can see a form which does not have any anti-CSF token. Whereas something like the X-frame option header, it's missing, so we don't have any evidence. You'll also notice that the attack field is empty for all of the alerts raised by the passive scanner. That's because we're not doing any attacking, we're just looking and we're not touching. And some of them in this particular case, oh yeah, so there we'll see we've got the evidence is a 500. You may find some passive scan don't actually have any evidence when they should do, but if you find that, then please let us know. And one thing I will point out is All of these are HTTP requests or HTTPS ones, but we do actually do passive scanning on WebSockets as well. I'm not going to demo that today. Maybe I'll do that when I get to WebSockets in a future session. So what happens is whenever we proxy anything through ZAP, then all of the requests get added to this passive scan queue, and we have a separate thread which goes through and runs all of the passive scan rules against that. And if any of those rules find potential problems, then they will raise the alerts, which you'll see down here. Why do we do this? I mean, why do we separate this from active scanning? Well, one of the reasons we separate from active scanning is it's actually safe. And this is really good because you can actually use it against your production site. You can use it on sites that you don't have permission to actively scan. So you can actually have it on while you're just browsing the internet, if you like. You'll see things, and all ZAP is doing is looking at the requests and responses locally. It is not doing any extra interaction with the website. So there's no way for the website to tell you're actually doing it, and what you're doing is completely legal. Whereas if you're doing actually attacking, you wouldn't want to do that. Well, you might not want to do that on your production site, and you certainly wouldn't want to do it, or you shouldn't do it on sites that you don't have permission to test. Another advantage of the passive scanning is it's very quick. So one thing you can do is you can actually just do passive scanning. And we have a package scan for that. So we have what we call the baseline scan, and I'll cover the package scans in a future session, but the baseline scan only does passive scanning. And even if you run it against a whole site, it can take only a couple of minutes. So it's actually really good to include in your CI/CD pipeline. What I'll do now is show you some of the options. So we'll go to the options panel here, and if we scroll down, actually see there are a few options related to passive scanning. I will show you the passive scanner option first, and the first option is actually quite useful. It's only scanning messages in scope. So if you're doing automation, then this is very useful, but you have to actually define a scope. So you have to add your site to a context. Otherwise, you won't get any vulnerabilities raised, issues raised at all. And there's a next option is including traffic from the fuzzer when passive scanning. That's turned off by default. The fuzzer, again, this is something I'll go through in a later session. That's very much a manual tool. We've also got two options for, the first one is raising the maximum alerts that any scan rule can raise. Now, what you can do, but 0 means any number. But if you're using automation, then it's actually quite useful to set this to, I don't know, 10, something like that, because if you've got a particular problem, say one of the ones where we are missing X-frame options header, or a missing security header, chances are that will apply to, it could apply to every single one of your pages. So if you've got a particularly large site, that could be thousands of pages, and actually getting 1,000 alerts, or instances of alert, isn't actually that helpful. Once you've got 10 alerts, you've got enough information. You know that there's too many. So what you can do, particularly it's useful for automated scanning, set that to some sensible value. So one reason we don't set that is for things like the HUD, which is something else I'll go through in a future session. With the HUD, it's actually very useful for seeing the alerts on every single page. So that's the reason we don't actually set that when you're using ZAP manually. With the package scans, we do actually set that. We set that now. I'm pretty sure we do anyway. The next one is the maximum body size in bytes to scan. And we've added this because some of the passive scan rules use regex expressions, and sometimes on particularly large responses, those can actually take a while. So if you're finding the passive scanner is taking too long for you, particularly in automation, then you might want to play around with that setting as well. So that's the main passive scan settings. So we also have this one which shows you all of the passive scan rules. So this is a bit similar to the active scan policies, which I haven't gone through yet. But this is all of the scan rules. So you'll see we've got the name of the rule and this threshold, and also a quality. And you'll see, so we've got the beta beta and release quality rules. So I've got both of those installed. I haven't got the alpha ones installed at the moment. And if you actually click on the threshold, you'll see it's a pull down. The quality you can't change. That's kind of fixed. Although we do promote and sometimes demote rules. But when you're running ZAP, you can't change that, whereas you can change a threshold. So the threshold is the level at which ZAP will raise, or these rules will raise alerts. So everything is set to medium by default, but if you find a particular rule is raising things that you're not interested in, it's actually worth raising that to a high level. So a high level means that it's a high threshold, so the rules won't raise any potential issues which are a bit more, touch and go. Whereas if you actually set it to a low threshold, then ZAP will raise more potential issues, which could potentially include false positives. So if there's a particular type of rule that you are particularly interested in, and you really don't want to see any instances of those problems, you might want to set to a low threshold. And you can also set everything to off here. And so if you actually want to turn everything to off, you can apply the off threshold to everything, and then you'll have to turn them all off. And you can also do this on a per quality per release basis as well. But I don't want to do that. I want everything to be on medium, which is what we think is a kind of sensible level for all of the rules. What I'll also show you is, I'm going to mention these quite quickly, the scan tags. So what you might have seen, I will go to budget again and just launch Firefox. And actually, because I've launched Firefox has made a load of requests down here. And as you saw there, these alerts got filled in, and so did the tags as well. And they appeared afterwards because that was when the passive scanner was running. And you see these tags here, you'll see things like comment, JSON, upload, script, set cookie. So these are tags which just tell you a little bit more information about the requests and responses. And so if we go here to the passive scan tags, this is where they're defined. So you saw the JSON one there. If we double click on there, you'll see that was because this regex matched. So all of these tags basically have a regex expression, and that can be in the URL, in the header, request URL, request header, response header, or response body. And if those matches, then those tags will appear in the history. So, and you can change these, you can add them, you can enable and disable them. And the last thing I want to show is the rule configuration. And this is something which is actually, we should make more of this, because this is a way of actually changing how some of these rules work. And I'm going to show you some of these alerts, and I'm going to pick the HTTP, let's go for the same site one. Yep, HTTP only flag. You'll see there's actually a lot more information here. If you double click, you'll get more information. You can change it if you like. So what this particular rule is finding is cookies which don't have the HTTP only flag. And you can see here we've got this set cookie b_id. We also have a rule here for cookies without the same site attribute. And you'll see here that it's found a problem with the JSessionID. And here it's found a problem again with the b_id cookie. Now we'll see that the set cookie for JSON actually does set HTTP only, which is why we didn't get an alert raised for it under this particular rule. Now, in some cases, these rules don't tell you or are telling you too much. And this is actually a good example, because in this particular case, the HTTP only flag is being set on JSessionID, and that's good. So that's what we want. However, it is not being set on this, and from what I remember, this cookie is actually being used by JavaScript, so we don't want it to have the HTTP only flag. In some cases, I mean, we might, this particular cookie might be something we're really not interested in. We know there are no particular problems with. And there are various ways we can kind of filter the alerts, but quite a lot of the rules actually support extra configuration. So if I go to the rule configuration, we'll see a set of keys and with default values, potentially. And one of the ones we've got here is rules cookie ignore list. Double click on that, just a single click. What we'll see is there's a description. So it's a comma-separated list of cookie names. Cookies included in this list will be ignored when scanning for cookie-related issues. So we had b_id was one of our cookies and the one we want to ignore. So I'm not going to include the JSession ID, but I'm just going to save that. And we'll see that's there now. And we'll find that these alerts are still here. And that is because just changing the rules doesn't change the alerts that have already been found. So what I'm going to do is I am going to delete all of the alerts, and then I'm going to run the spider again. And this time I will do it from here because it involves less typing. And again, we'll see it go very quickly. And there's the passive scanner going through. And there we go. And so if I go to alerts now, we will see that the same site one is only there for HTTP only, and for JSession ID, and the HTTP only rule has not been triggered at all. So there's quite a few rules which support these different configurations. So if there are particular rules that are flagging things which you don't think should be flagged, and it's because it's contextual information you know about your application, then do check to see whether they support these rule configurations. And if you're not sure, please ask on the ZAP user group. So I mentioned the different types of, so I've got the release and beta passive scan rules included. Now, if I just go to manage add-ons and go to the marketplace, I have to check for updates. You'll see that there are alpha passive scan rules, so you can install those as well. And actually, you might have noticed if I go back to the passive scan rules, if you scroll down here, I think there's actually an alpha rule, and which seems a bit strange, but that is because any add-on can actually define its own passive scan rules. And in this particular case, I think it's the SOAP add-on, which I've got installed, which is including a WSDL file detection scan rule. So just because I haven't installed all of the standard set of alpha rules, I've still got that one particular one installed. One thing I've already done in previous session is talked about scripts. So I will go to the scripts tab now, and we also have passive scan rules which are defined as scripts. And because I've got the community scripts installed, I've got loads of rules here. They are all turned off by default, but we can have a look at them. We've actually got one for detecting HTTP only cookies. If I just have a quick look at that, so this does then duplicate the one we've got, but this means it's something we can play around with. So what you'll see is there is just one function that needs to be implemented called scan, and we have a helper here. We've got the message and we've got the source, and this rule just defines information about the alerts, and all it does is a very simple regex looking for HTTP only in different cases. And if it finds that when it's got the set cookie header, then it'll raise the alert. As you can see, passive scan rules are actually very easy to define, particularly in scripts. So we've got a whole load here, find HTML comments, which is actually a little bit more complicated, but not much. There are lots of different examples you can play around with. So if you fancy actually writing your own scan rules, then I would really recommend getting started with the scripts because they're very easy. You can play around with, you can try them out, and you can test them very quickly. One thing I'll also mention is that we actually have the script, all of the WebSocket passive scan rules are implemented as scripts. So you can see all of those there, and you can read through them, play with them and change them if you like. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you quickly where to look in the code for all of this stuff. So let's go to GitHub and go to ZA Proxy, a little bit bigger. So if we scroll down to ZAP and then source, just drill down here, main Java org ZA Proxy. So we go to extension and then look for something called pscan for passive scan. So this is where the infrastructure for the passive scanner lives. And I think I mentioned before, if you see anything starting extension something, then that is the entry point. So extension passive scan is where we'll start if we want to start looking at this stuff. And actually, if you see this copyright statement, it's one of the first things we actually implemented as part of ZAP. So this is a very early change, or the infrastructure was. So what you'll see is we've got various things for adding and removing passive scanners, but actually the more interesting one is we scroll down the passive scan thread. So this is the main thread that actually loops around and waits for messages. So we actually see here's the thread. And one thing we'll do is actually, it's going to the history table. So it's actually reading things from the history table, check and pulling things off. So it's grabbing every reference off the history table and then checking to see whether it actually needs to apply or not. And one question we get is which records actually get passively scanned? And the answer is that's actually defined by the scan rules themselves. So the scan rules actually tell the infrastructure whether they apply to the history type. That's the infrastructure, and all the other methods, classes in this package are all related to that. But you can wade through those as you like. But where are the actual rules defined? Well, although everything is, all the infrastructure is in ZA Proxy, the rules are defined in ZAP extensions, because that's where we define the add-ons that we can add to, that we can put in the marketplace and we can update regularly. They're defined in different places. So the easiest way to find where a particular passive scan rule and active scan rule, for that matter, is defined is via the website. So if you go to the website and go to documentation and see alert details. And what we have here is we have a list of all the alerts that ZAP can raise. Well, strictly speaking, not all of them. Sorry, didn't mean to do that. Just stop highlighting those. So this is, it is the HTTP passive and active scan rules. So we don't include the scripts here or the WebSocket passive scripts either. So we do plan to include those, but this page is actually automatically generated. So we need to make some changes to add all of those things here. But you can see the status, you can see the average risk that gets raised, and you can see the type, whether active, passive, and we'll probably have the WebSocket things will appear there when those are there as well. So let's have a look for the cookie no HTTP only flag, so which is here. And you can actually see, so a summary and solution reference, but the key thing is the code. So on all of these pages, the last thing is a link to the code. So we can actually have a look at the code, and in this particular case, so it's a release quality, so it's in the pscan rules under ZAP extensions add-ons, pretty early one as well. And what we'll see is it's a little bit longer than the script, but so it tries to we're actually getting set cookie and set cookie 2, which the script doesn't do. It only handles set cookie. And this is where we're actually looking at the ignore list. If it's on the ignore list, then we don't raise any issues. And as you can see here, this is where we're doing the check that it doesn't include the HTTP only cookie attribute. We ignore expired cookies, and then we're ignoring ones that they're in the ignore list. And other than that, we build the alert, and this is where we build the alert. So there's a bit more around here, and particularly things like the description solution. These are actually internationalized, so we're grabbing those from a message file. But even so, it's actually quite simple, hopefully quite simple to understand. And some of the rules are easier, are quite simple, and some of them more complicated, not too surprisingly. One thing I will also show you is some stats. So you'll see some stats here for the request body being too big, and down here we'll actually see we are recording the number of milliseconds that every particular scan rule takes. And that's because we want to find, there's really useful information that comes out of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to point my browser directly at ZAP, and what I can do is now actually look at the local API, and we have the pscan. No, sorry, it's scripts is what I wanted to show you. Sorry, stats. So go to the stats, and what I'll do is there are site stats and there are kind of global stats. In this particular case, it's the global stats we're interested in. And what I'll do is you'll see that here we have, I could have filtered them, but I knew it would only be passive scan ones being shown. So we can actually see the total milliseconds that these rules have taken. So quite a few of these, the really short ones might not have been actually used at all, but no HTTP only flag has taken 14 milliseconds in total. And if we scroll down here, we will see things a lot bigger. So WAPalizer, technology detection, that's taken a lot longer. So that's actually using some quite significant regex expressions. And see if there are any others. I mean, we know that's a pretty big one. But some of the other ones, or X-frame options, taking a little while as well, but nowhere near in the same kind of league as that. If you're finding that the passive scanning is taking too long, then it might be actually worth having a look here and seeing which rules are to blame. You might well find this because some of the files actually they're running against are too big, in which case you can try setting that option that I mentioned before about the maximum size. And I think we'll see that if we go back here, we'll see that if we actually find any requests that are too big, then we increase a counter. So you'll actually see how many messages have been ignored because it's actually, the request is too big or the response body is too big. Right, next time is going to be to go through active scanning. And after that, we'll see. So thank you very much and see you next time.